The Sunday dinners were like a ritual nobody questioned anymore, something my family had been doing for so long that it no longer required explanation. I drove through the quiet streets of Upper Arlington, with the windows down even though it was October, and the air was starting to turn. The neighborhood where my parents still lived was the kind of place that felt frozen in a particular version of middle-class comfort. Large houses with manicured lawns, proper mailboxes, the kind of quiet that comes from people who have decided their lives should look a certain way and spent considerable energy making sure they did. I had been making this drive for the same 4 hours every Sunday for almost 10 years. My apartment was downtown, small and efficient, the kind of place I had moved into when my parents gently suggested that it would be prudent for me to save money, and I had taken that suggestion with the seriousness I applied to most of their guidance. A third-grade teacher's salary stretched only so far, and the joint savings account my parents had helped me open when I was 23 had become the thing I organized my life around. Every paycheck I transferred $500. It felt responsible. It felt like planning. It felt like something a person who had her life together would do. My mother had opened the door before I even fully rang the bell, which meant she had been watching for my car. She was wearing the blue dress she saved for occasions, the one with the silver clasp at the neck that my father had given her years ago, back when he still gave her jewelry on what seemed like a regular basis. I noticed the champagne glasses on the counter behind her, and I felt something shift in my chest, some small animal sense that registered something was off. We didn't drink champagne on Sunday dinners. Sunday dinners were pot roast and vegetables and coffee afterward, while we sat in the living room discussing the week, and my parents discussed the news. "Marianne," my mother said, and she pulled me into the kind of hug that was more about positioning than warmth, her hand careful on the back of my hair so as not to disturb it. "You look tired. Are you eating enough?" This was a question she asked me often, despite the fact that I had never been thin and had never looked anything but adequately fed. It was the opening move of the evening, and I set my purse on the hall table and followed her into the dining room where my father was already standing, looking particularly formal in a button-down shirt with the cuffs folded precisely. My sister was there too, and that was the second signal that something was planned. Brianna lived only 10 minutes away, but rarely came to Sunday dinner anymore, not since she had gotten engaged 18 months ago to a man named David, who worked in software development, and who my parents found appropriately ambitious. The table was set with the good china, the ones from my grandmother's collection that were usually saved for holidays. There were cloth napkins. There were candles. My father pulled out my mother's chair in a way that suggested rehearsal, and I sat down across from my sister, who was smiling in a way I recognized from social media. The smile she used in pictures, the one that seemed to be about documenting happiness rather than experiencing it. "We have something to celebrate tonight," my father said, once we had all settled. He poured the champagne with the care of someone who was aware of the significance of the gesture. My mother reached over and placed her hand on his arm, and they exchanged a look that made me think they had rehearsed this moment, gone over the phrasing, made sure they were aligned. "Your sister has closed on a property." The words should have made sense individually, but seemed to scramble when they came together. Brianna was looking at my mother with an expression of barely contained excitement, the kind of expression she had gotten good at on Instagram, the kind that suggested she was already composing the caption in her head. "A townhouse," my sister said, and she held up her left hand, as if I might have missed the engagement ring that had been on display for 18 months. "Downtown, in the new development near the Arena District. It's incredible, actually. Marble counters, a small courtyard, one of those smart home systems David has been going on about. We close next month." I was still processing this when my father continued, his voice taking on the cadence he used when he was explaining something he had already decided was correct. "We were able to help with the down payment. Family should support family, and your mother and I felt it was the right moment to invest in Brianna's future. Her and David's, really. They're going to build a life there." The champagne was cold in my mouth. I set the glass down without drinking from it. There was a sound in my head that was not quite a sound, more like the absence of one, like all the air had been pulled out of the room and replaced with something I couldn't breathe. My father was talking about mortgage rates and appreciation, and the smart decision to buy now before the market shifted further. And my mother was nodding in that particular way that meant she was not really listening, but was instead monitoring my face to see how I was receiving the information. "That's wonderful," I heard myself say, and the words sounded like they belonged to someone else, someone who was trained in the appropriate response to family good news, someone who had spent her whole life learning to locate joy in other people's victories. "Congratulations, Bree." The rest of the dinner moved like something choreographed. We ate the pot roast, though it sat heavy in my stomach, and my mother served the green beans with almonds that required her to make them fresh every time, which I had always understood as an act of love, or at least of obligation. My sister talked about the townhouse, about David's work, about their plans to start trying for a baby next year, now that they would have proper space. My father asked questions in that engaged way that meant he approved of all of this, and my mother smiled in a way that suggested her whole life had been organized toward this moment. I excused myself to use the bathroom when my mother stood to clear the plates, and I locked the door and opened the banking app on my phone with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. The joint account had a balance of $0. The last transaction, dated the day before, showed a withdrawal of $64,873.12. The memo line was empty. I stood there and looked at those numbers, and I understood something with a clarity that was almost physical. 10 years of $500 a month. 120 months. I had done the math once, standing in this same bathroom, looking at my face in the mirror, calculating how long it would take to reach $100,000, imagining the house I might buy, the life I might build. I had cut back on restaurants, on travel, on the vacations my college friends took in the summers. I had stayed in the same apartment that had a water stain on the ceiling. I had turned down a job opportunity in Arizona because my parents said the distance would be difficult for them. And I had understood this as concern and not as control. Or at least I had made a choice not to examine it too closely. The water in the sink was cold when I turned it on. I washed my hands and watched the water circle the drain. And I thought about all the conversations I had never had, all the moments I had interpreted caution as care, all the small adjustments I had made to my own life in order to remain the reliable one, the understanding one, the daughter who could be depended upon to absorb inconvenience without complaint. When I came back out, my sister was taking photographs of the dessert, a store-bought chocolate cake arranged on my mother's good china in a way that suggested this was content for social media. My father was looking at his phone. My mother was watching my face with an expression that suggested she was waiting to see how I would react to something she had decided was acceptable. "I need to talk to you all," I said, and the calmness in my voice surprised even me. "About the down payment, about the account." My father set his phone down with the precision of someone who had decided that someone else's crisis did not warrant his full attention. "Marianne, this is not the time for financial discussions. Your sister is having a moment and we should be supportive. I have been depositing $500 a month into that account since I was 23 years old," I said. I was not shouting. I was not even raising my voice. I was speaking the way I had been taught to speak in situations where I needed to be heard, the way my mother had modeled when she wanted something that she didn't think anyone would actually give her. I have been depositing my own money with the understanding that it was for my future, my purchase, my security. That money was not yours to use. My mother made a small sound, something between a breath and a word, and she reached for my father's hand. "Sweetheart, we felt that the appropriate thing was to help your sister establish her life, and we knew you would understand. You're the responsible one. You're the one who will always be fine." The word fine hung in the air like something physical. I looked at my sister, who was no longer smiling the Instagram smile, but was instead looking at her plate with an expression of discomfort, the kind of discomfort that suggested she had been told a story about the money that had not required her to think too carefully about where it came from or what it cost. "I'm not going to be fine," I said, and there was still no volume to my voice, just a kind of clarity that came from understanding something I had somehow always known. "I'm going to need that money, All of it. With interest. It was taken from me without my consent or knowledge. My father put his fork down, and I could see him making a decision about what kind of conversation this was going to be. He took the tone he used with people who were being unreasonable, the tone of someone who had decided that the other person's feelings were not based in reality. Marianne, I'm going to say this once. This family helps family. That account was set up with our guidance, with our help, and we felt that the most productive use of those funds was to support your sister in building a life with her husband. You need to think about what message you're sending by getting upset about this. The message I'm sending is that my money matters, I said. The message I'm sending is that I exist, that I have wants too, that I shouldn't have to absorb other people's decisions about my own life. My mother's face had gone pale in a way that suggested I was doing something dangerous, something that violated a rule that had never been spoken aloud, but had been understood since childhood. We did not make my parents feel bad. We did not challenge their authority. We did not suggest that their decisions were anything other than wise and carefully considered. I think you're being incredibly selfish right now, my sister said, and I looked at her and saw that she meant it, that she had already rewrote the story in her head, that the money had come to her in a way that had nothing to do with my sacrifice. You know, David and I have been saving, and we finally have a chance to buy something nice, and you're making this about you. It is about me, I said. It's all been about me. All of this. Every single part of it has been about what I owe to this family, not what this family owes to me. I left the table and retrieved my purse from the hall. My mother called after me with the kind of voice that suggested this was already becoming a story she would tell differently. A version where I had become hysterical, where I had overreacted, where I had misunderstood something that was actually an act of love. I printed out the bank statements in my car before I drove away, sitting in the driveway with my hands on the steering wheel, making sure I had documentation, because I suddenly understood that documentation was the only thing that would matter. The next morning, I called Natalie, who had been my friend since college, and who had become a paralegal at a firm in downtown Columbus. I told her about the account, about the withdrawal, about the fact that I did not know what to do with the understanding that my family had taken money that belonged to me and had redistributed it without my permission. I could hear her shifting into the voice she used when she was thinking about something as a legal matter rather than a personal one. That's not legal, she said flatly. That's financial misappropriation. They were co-signers, not owners. Send me the bank statements, all of them. Let me talk to someone at my firm. My phone started buzzing after that. My mother called 3 times before 9 in the morning. My father sent an email that was addressed to Marianne Keller in a way that suggested he was writing to me as though I were someone in a professional context, someone he had to be careful around. My sister texted in the group chat that she didn't understand why I was being like this, as though my response to having my money taken was some kind of character flaw that she could not fathom. I did not respond to any of them. Instead, I spent my Tuesday evening meeting with a lawyer named David Reynolds, who worked at a firm near the courthouse. His office was modern and expensive in a way that suggested competence, and he listened to my story while making notes on a legal pad that felt official and important. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "This is very clear-cut," he said. "The account is in your name. Your parents were co-signers. The withdrawal was unauthorized, and it represents a conversion of your personal property. You have documentation, you have the dates, you have the banking records. We can pursue this civilly, and we can likely recover the full amount with interest. The question is whether you want to do that." He said it in a way that suggested this was a choice, that I had agency in this situation. I had spent so much of my life in situations where I had been told what the correct thing was to do, where my own preferences had been treated as something that required external validation. The idea that I could simply choose what happened next felt almost radical. "I want the money back," I said. "All right," he said. "Then let's talk about how we make that happen." Natalie came over on Thursday with a bottle of wine and the kind of expression that suggested she was prepared to be angry on my behalf if I could not quite manage it myself. She sat on my couch in my small apartment with the water stain on the ceiling and listened to me explain the details of the meeting with David Reynolds. And then she told me something that made everything clearer. "This isn't the first time," she said, "is it?" I thought about this question. I thought about my sister getting money for college without having to work, about the way my father had helped her with her first car, about the unexpected checks that appeared in her account at strategic moments. I thought about the year I had wanted to spend the summer in San Francisco, and my parents had explained that it was irresponsible, that I needed to think about my future, that good daughters did not just run off to California. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe." "Call your aunt," Natalie said. I had not spoken to my Aunt Patricia in nearly 2 years. She was my father's sister, and they had been estranged since before I was born, for reasons that had always been vague and complicated, and somehow my father's interpretation of events had become the official family narrative. My mother never spoke about her, and when my aunt's name came up, my father would change the subject with a firmness that suggested he did not want to think about whatever had happened between them. I looked up her number through a Facebook message. She lived in Cleveland now, in a small house that she owned alone, and when I called her, she answered on the third ring and said my name in a way that suggested she had been waiting for this call, or at least some version of it. "I wanted to ask you about something," I said carefully. "About Dad, about the way he handles money." There was a pause that felt very long, and then my aunt took a breath and told me a story that I realized I had always known in some fundamental way. The way you know something without being told. The way you understand the rules of a house without reading them written down. "When I was your age," she said, "maybe a little younger, our parents set up an account for me. They said it was for my future, for a house, for security. I added to it the way you probably did. And when I was ready to leave, ready to go to graduate school, they took it and gave it to your father. They said it was to help with a business venture. They said I should be supportive. They said I would understand. But you didn't," I said. "But I didn't," she agreed. "And I left, and I have not spoken to them in 35 years. She told me this without bitterness, just as a fact, and then she told me about the pattern. She told me about the way it had manifested with my father, about the small ways he had learned to manage my mother, about the subtle control that had been repackaged as guidance. She told me about my sister, about the way that my sister had been selected to receive what I had been selected to provide. "The question is whether this stops with you," my aunt said. I was sitting in my kitchen when she said this, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that I was at a crossroads. I could accept the story that I should be understanding, that family mattered more than my own needs, that my sacrifice was the thing that made me valuable, or I could stop. I could insist that I had value regardless of what I gave up. I could believe that my needs mattered too. "It stops with me," I said. The formal meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later, after David Reynolds had sent a letter explaining the situation to my parents' attorney, a man named Gregory, who worked at a firm that my father had known for years, and whom my father was probably counting on to make this all go away quietly. The meeting took place in the conference room of David Reynolds' office, and it was the first time I had ever been in a room where I was positioned as someone who would not be moved, someone whose needs were not negotiable. My parents arrived with Gregory, and my sister came with them, and I could see immediately that they had discussed this, that they had decided on a strategy. My mother was wearing her concerned face, the one she used when she was about to explain something important to someone who was not thinking clearly. My father had his professional expression, the one he used in business situations. My sister looked angry in a way that suggested she felt betrayed, though I could not figure out by what exactly, except perhaps by the revelation that she was not entitled to my sacrifice without question. David Reynolds laid out the documentation with the precision of someone who had done this many times. He showed them the bank statements, the monthly deposits over 10 years, the withdrawal made without authorization. He explained the law in a calm voice that did not require raising, did not require emphasis. "My clients took $500 per month from this account in good faith," Gregory said, which was a characterization that David Reynolds immediately contradicted. "Your clients took $64,873 from an account held in their daughter's name without her permission," David Reynolds said. That's not good faith. That's conversion. My mother started crying, which I had somehow known she would do, which was a part of the script that we all understood. My father leaned forward and tried a different approach, the approach that involved making me feel guilty. Marianne, do you really want to do this? He said. Do you really want to go to court against your parents? Do you understand what that will do to your mother? I thought about all the times I had believed that my mother's feelings were my responsibility, that it was my job to manage her emotional state, that her anxiety about what people would think was more important than my own stability. I thought about the years of organizing my life around the absence of wanting anything that would upset anyone else. I want the money back, I said. Your sister and her new husband are building a life, my mother said. Surely you can understand that family helps family. I am family, I said. And I helped. For 10 years I helped. And the result of that help was that my own future was used to build someone else's. My sister spoke then, and she said something that I realized had been true all along. The thing that gave me the clarity to sit in that room and insist on something I had been taught never to ask for. You can just save again, Brianna said, with the confidence of someone who had always had things given to her. It's not like the money is gone. You just have to rebuild. And I understood then that she genuinely did not see what she had done, did not understand that it was not the money itself, but what the money represented. It was not a purchase or a down payment. It was the belief that I mattered, that my needs counted, that I did not exist only to make other people's lives possible. The settlement was signed 3 hours later. My parents agreed to return the full amount of $64,873 with interest. The funds were transferred within 24 hours. My sister did not speak to me again, not that day, and not in the days and weeks that followed. My mother called once a week and left voicemails that involved apologies that were not quite apologies, explanations that sounded like justifications, requests for forgiveness that required me to say it was okay, which it was not. I began to build a different life after that, not in the way I had imagined when I was depositing $500 a month, but in a way that felt more real. I donated a portion of the recovered money to the scholarship fund at my school, which meant that other people whose families did not have the kind of resources mine did, would have opportunities that they might not otherwise have. I purchased a small cottage on the edge of town, nothing grand or ostentatious, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a yard where things could grow. The house was mine in a way that felt fundamental, purchased with my own money, documented in my own name, a space where I did not have to ask permission to exist the way I wanted to. My friendship with Natalie deepened in the way that friendships do when you have allowed someone to see you during something difficult, and they have not flinched. We began hosting dinners at the cottage, just the 2 of us at first, and then slowly including other people, friends from school and old college acquaintances, and people I met by chance who seemed to understand that we were building something intentional and careful. My Aunt Patricia came to visit, and we sat in the living room of my small house and talked about things that I wish someone had told me years ago, things about recognizing when you are being asked to shrink yourself, about the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. At school, I noticed something shifting too. I had always been good at my job, had always shown up prepared and caring, had always put the needs of my students first. But I had done it in a way that was also about being essential, about being needed, about making myself indispensable in a way that I had learned was how to secure love. I began to be good at my job in a different way, still caring for my students but not at the cost of my own well-being, still showing up but with boundaries, still being a good teacher but in a way that did not require me to diminish myself. The townhouse where my sister was building her new life was featured on Instagram multiple times. Photographs of the kitchen during renovations, of the courtyard with plants that she had purchased but would probably not maintain, of her and David smiling in front of the marble counters that my money had purchased. I did not like these photographs, but I also did not allow the existence of them to diminish what I had done. I had set a boundary. I had insisted that I mattered. That was still true whether or not my sister acknowledged it. 1 year after the settlement, my mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if she could visit. I said yes, because I was no longer afraid of her. Or rather, I had learned to be afraid of her, and to see her anyway, to hold her accountable while still maintaining some small thread of connection. She arrived at my cottage with flowers that she had bought at a grocery store, the kind that were nice enough but came with the plastic stems already wrapped in colored paper. And we sat on the porch because the weather was finally turning, the air beginning to feel like autumn again, the time of year when I had made the drive to my parents' house for so many years. My mother looked at the cottage, and I could see her registering that I had built something, that I had made something real and tangible from the stand I had taken. She did not apologize, not in the way that apologies are supposed to work, the way they should come with accountability and change. But she said, "I see now that we were not fair to you," which was perhaps as close as she could get to something true. We sat together in the declining light, and I did not feel the need to fill the silence or to help her feel better about what had happened. I let her sit with the discomfort of knowing that she had done something wrong, that her daughter had had to become a lawyer's client to reclaim her own money. We talked about small things, about the school year and about her book club and about the way the neighborhood was changing. When she left, I walked her to her car and let her hug me, and I did not stand too still or stand too far away. That evening, I sat on the porch with a notebook, and I wrote. Not because I was trying to document anything for anyone else, but because writing had always been the way I organized my thoughts. I wrote about the person I had been, the person who made herself small in order to be loved, who confused sacrifice with worthiness, who believed that her needs mattered less than everyone else's. I wrote about the moment in the bathroom, when I checked the bank account, and understood that I had been abandoned by the people who should have protected me. I wrote about the clarity that came not from anger but from understanding. And then I wrote about the cottage, about the way the porch caught the light in the late afternoon, about the way it felt to live in a space that was entirely mine. I wrote about my students, and about Natalie, and about my Aunt Patricia. I wrote about the understanding that the greatest thing I had reclaimed was not the money, though the money mattered, though it gave me security and options, and a sense of possibility. The greatest thing I had reclaimed was the belief that my needs mattered too. I sat on the porch as the light faded, watching the street lamp come on at the corner, and I felt something that I had rarely felt before. Something that was not happiness exactly, but rather a kind of peace that came from knowing myself, from having insisted on being known, from having taken what was mine, and having decided that was enough.